Hi, everybody. I'm Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Thanks so much for coming to Madison, Ruby. Like Jim said 3 times, this is always one of my favorite conferences, and it's always been special to me for a number of different reasons. So thank you all for being here. When Jim asked me to come speak, he was like, "Steve, what do you want to talk about?" And I said, "I don't know," and let the email pile up forever, because that's what I do, is let emails pile up forever. And then Y came back, and so I was like, all right, let's do this. So this is a one-time talk. You know that you all know that I speak at a lot of conferences. Sometimes I give the same talk over again with modifications, but one of the reasons that I'm excited you all are here is because this is the only time I'm doing this talk. So thanks. So anyway, this talk is called Closure. This is time well spent. So as you probably know, this is a talk about this guy. It's sort of funny. I've been doing this recently too. I hate the raise your hands meme, but who does not know who Y the Lucky Stiff is in this room? Sweet. Welcome to Ruby. Thanks for being here. No, I see that with with truthness. It's actually this is the smallest percentage of people at a conference I've been to where I've talked about this, and we've been in Ruby world for a long time. Remember, Y disappeared 4 years ago, and Ruby and Rails has grown so much in those last 4 years that there's no reason for people to remember our petty drama of years past, right? So it's sort of like if I was like, oh, remember that time whenever Zed Shah flamed out of Rails? A lot of you might remember now, but the point is that we're growing and there's new people here. So I'm going to try to fill you in on the details about this guy and why I'm giving a talk on him. So this man's name is Y, the Lucky Stiff, and it makes it very hard to have conversations because with people that don't know that's his name. I had a conversation in a cab one time in Austin, and the driver turned around and was like, "I'm sorry, I'm not trying to inject on your conversation here, but what are you saying?" Because it just, it messes people up. So, okay, so Y quit programming. I'll get to that in a minute. First, I want to talk about him coming back. So this is a talk about a document called Closure, and that's what I've been calling it anyway. Y returned from his leaving and gave us 95 pages of stuff. And it is super good and super interesting, but people had said to me, Steve, you like doing all that reading stuff. I don't know what all these words mean. Could you just tell me what the answer is? So in many cases, this is true because it is a very interesting document. It is like a story. It is a number of stories. It's all sorts of things. And so I sort of wanted to give you guys a talk on my thoughts on this thing, and then you should all go read it. So basically, Y decided to repost stuff on his website, and it actually allowed you to, it was a printer spool. So it would let you download these pages as they came through, and then, once it's done printing, they went away. So you get 5 pages at a time in a cycle. And so this is a photo that I took when I printed out one of the pages at home. Not all the pages look like this, and we'll actually be bringing up the document a little later, so you'll see what it all looks like. But we got these sweet, a photo of a page with handwriting on it, right? This is one of those silly things where I saw a poster that was missing poster with 2 stickers ripped out, and then it had the photo of itself into infinity. It's just missing poster, missing poster. So this is the same kind of thing. And yeah, so 95 pages, so it's pretty thick and awesome. So much good stuff in here. There's going to be a teeny little bit of spoilers. I'm sorry. I assume that by coming to a talk about a thing, if you didn't read the thing, you'd expect to hear about the thing. So I don't I don't mean to kill it for you, but I'm probably going to end up spoiling it. So my bad. But just to put it out there, if you don't want to be tainted by my words, leave now. Okay. And to go back over the full story again of Y and his return and everything. So basically, this is the actual man, Jonathan, who is Y the Lucky Stiff. That was his pseudonym. And basically, he did a lot of really awesome stuff with Ruby and programming in general. And then decided 4 years ago, as of Monday, to commit info suicide and destroy every piece of him that was left on the internet. We'll talk about that obviously a lot, but that was basically what happened. And then he was gone just one day, just totally gone. So there's this article where you can read more about all the details. Where's Y by Annie Lowry. And basically, yeah, so he disappeared and was totally gone. A bunch of us decided to pick up his projects, me being one of them. And this was largely because I did not want Y's work to die. So I never actually got to meet Y, because when he came to Pittsburgh, my hometown, I was out of town for the weekend. And I was like, oh, I missed Y. I'll see him next time he's around. And then he wasn't. Whenever he disappeared, people started collecting all of his works that had been done previously. And because we have Git, basically because the Ruby world moved to Git, we still have Y the Lucky Stiff's stuff, basically, because everyone had copies of it. And so we were able to salvage what he deleted. Now, basically everybody stood up and said, hey, I want to take over this project. I want to take over that project. And so I looked at his projects and I was like, Hackety Hack is the ultimate project of Y's. Everything else that he built was in service to Hackety Hack in many ways. And so I wanted it to not die. But I was pretty new to Ruby. I had built one production Rails app and I had done some Ruby stuff. But I had not really done a whole lot of open source before. And so I said, I'm just going to come around and help whoever decides to pick up Hackety Hack. Like, I'm just going to help out. And so then Flip, the guy who was keeping track of everyone, was like, cool, you're in charge of Hackety Hack. And I was like, no, that's not what I said. The problem is that then people didn't show up. So it was just me. And so I was like, well, I guess I have to sort of step it up and write some code and not let this thing die. So that's sort of what I decided to do. And one of the big things that I had a super big crisis of conscience about for the first long slog, it actually took me 6 months to compile Shoes the first time. And we'll talk more about why that happened later. But basically during this really long, hard part, and I was trying to put things together, I had this really big deal of okay, Y left? So now this thing is mine. And what does that mean, right? Taking over what you consider someone else's life's work to then make it your life's work is a really weird thing, right? Because I didn't want to be that guy who fucked up Y's stuff, right? That's bad. But I also didn't want to make it be slavishly going over Y and what would Y do. I did not want that to be the way that Hackety should be. But it took me a long time to come to terms and be okay with that. Anyway, so in the end of this article, Ms. Lowry decided that when she interviewed me for it, she basically said, how do I get a hold of Y? And I was like, you can't get a hold of Y. And she was like, no, but I mean, how would I go about, what do you think would be the best way of actually getting in touch with Jonathan? And I said, you shouldn't. It's terrible. Don't do it. Stop. But then she did it anyway. And I was kind of, to be honest, slightly happy because then I got to know that he was okay without being morally culpable for the fact that he was known that he was okay. So, that's kind of amusing. But so she figured out, basically, she found the place that he worked and literally went to his work and was like, I want to speak to Jonathan. And then they were like, no. And she was like, but for reals, I really need to talk to him. And they were like, he doesn't want to talk to you. And she's like, can you at least make sure that he does work here, right? And they're like, we can't confirm or deny the existence of this person. But basically just deduced. And finally, when he said yes, I'm here, I'm fine, leave me alone, she left. So we knew that he was okay. Then long time passed, and one day I was walking to go get some pizza, and I was checking Hacker News on my phone because I'm terrible, and I saw this thing that said, "Why the Lucky Stiff site is back," and so I frantically clicked on it and saw that there was this weird printer spool thing that had a couple documents, and so we downloaded it and found some of the things that were on there, and it basically said at the end this printer spool is going down for maintenance until April 17th, from noon till about 4. And so then in the intermediate time, that was in November, if I remember correctly, or December, early December. So we had a while until April happened, so I set an alarm on my phone and was April 17th, I'm not forgetting. And a couple more pages came through in the middle time, one of which had a handwritten OCaml program that would actually pull the site and download stuff and send it to your printer right away. Because the files that were posted were actually PCL files, which is a specific file format, the raw bits that the printer takes in. So this was an actual literal or printer spool. So printed all those things out, and they came through, and we got this. Now he's gone. So that's the story. That's the summary, the backdrop of everything, so that we're all on the same page. So what I want to cover today is, first of all, briefly before we get into this, I unfortunately have to diverge slightly into postmodernism. I apologize. It will be brief. Then we're going to talk about the question, like major themes in this work. So the biggest one is identity, and then impermanence. And then finally, we're going to talk about where he is and where do we go from here. So, okay, so briefly, postmodernism. Because it's like a really, really important in how you read this work and also how you can like understand a lot of what Y was about. So you're already probably fans of postmodernism, even if you think you hate postmodernism. And the reason is community. So like Community is everybody Community fans? Really like Community? Yeah. New season's not that great, but the original one's awesome. I hate saying that so much. When I heard Jessie J's first single come on the radio, I thought originally that she was Katy Perry, and I was like, am I really going to be the person who's like, I prefer Katy Perry's earlier work? So it happens. Anyway, so Community takes into like large elements of postmodernism, and the reason that Community is good is because of postmodernism. So Closure is written in the same style, so when I talk about this, I'm going to make some brief Community allusions. If you haven't seen Community, you should go home and watch the first 3 seasons right now. It's on Hulu, and the Netflix, I think, whatever. Okay, so this dude Lyotard defined postmodernism as incredulity towards meta-narratives. That's like the most succinct way of putting what postmodernism is, which is even hard to nail down itself. And I chose this definition initially because nerds love meta, right? And we got our hands locked on meta as a concept. So basically, a narrative for Lyotard is this like story that organizes the way that society works or the way that we do things. And so meta-narratives are narratives about narratives. So like how do we tell the story of how we go together and like work together? And so we should be skeptical or incredulous, however you say this word. I was forced to read as a child, and so I can't pronounce anything at all. But basically, we should be skeptical of meta-narratives. So for example, when there's a story that says 10,000 years ago the earth was made, and by the way dinosaurs are fake and that's how we all got here, you should be skeptical. When someone says evolution caused all these things to be here and that's the grand unifying narrative, you should be skeptical. When someone says I have the answer to the truth, you should be skeptical of what they're saying, because who knows what the truth even is actually, right? There's your side, their side, and what actually happened. Right? That's kind of like very much what this is like. With Community embodies postmodernism because like the show Community is theoretically about a bunch of college students that get together to have a study group. But first of all, you never actually see them go to college. Like they're always just in that room where the study group happens. And the study group wasn't even really a study group because Jeff made it up in the first place because he wanted to be lazy. So like the whole entire story about why the story of Community is happening is just like an outright lie. It doesn't actually ever happen. And all the characters' personal stories are almost outright lies too, right? So you have the non-acting activist who has never done any works of activism in a while. You have the person who probably has Asperger's syndrome is like the most human and most relatable and most emotional out of everything, and like all these sub things too, where like total stories are lies. So you may notice that I am giving you a meta story about this Y stuff, so you should just like ignore me. That's what I'm saying. But I'm not quite, because I'm going to go with the other definition of postmodernism, one of the other ones, which is genealogy. So this is a Foucault and Nietzsche thing. Basically, genealogy is a historical technique in which one questions the commonly understood beliefs of the time. So basically, instead of trying to come up with these grand unifying stories, you pick some themes and you show how they had different amounts of influence in different time periods and how they can contradict and affirm each other and like all these other things. So this is why I said like I'm not going to give you the story of Closure in order. I'm going to talk to you about these couple themes and we're going to go over it because I think that's a much more honest way to review this kind of stuff. And this also means that Closure in itself has no actual real objective truth. Everything when you read it will be different than when I read it because we're different people and we experience it differently. So that's important. Because basically, like, every time I read it, I see something differently. So just because I say that I have this opinion does not mean you should treat it as valid. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so first theme, identity. Who is Y? You may notice already, like, right, I've already referenced him by his name, Jonathan, as well as his name Y, because he is two people, Question mark. And this sort of question of like, who am I? What am I doing? Is one of the biggest things that you can see why struggle with while writing this. And he's like working through this process of his own identity. So to this, we're gonna go briefly to this. One of the other things, I know it's terrible to read stuff that's written on slides, but since I'm assuming that a lot of you did not read or memorize this stuff, I'm gonna have to read off of some slides, so I apologize. So we're gonna go to Dr. Pestis on page 18 here. Okay, so this is a story briefly where Y was like interested in getting the opinion of this person who is an expert on pseudo-anonymity. So he says, Dr. Pestis, good afternoon. I'm a fellow, a professor of sorts, who's doing work under an anonymous guise, and I've finished reading your book, Kill Yourself, the terrible things people say and do when they aren't themselves. Now, before you start to usher a reply, I'm not writing to disagree with you. My complaint is that my real name is very plain, and I prefer to have a fictional one. You don't seem to suffer this problem, since your real name is quite fictional sounding in its own. I do realize that having a fictional name makes me a bad person, but how bad of a person does it make me? Please rate me on the scale of John Q. Public to Mr. X. Also, is it too late to be real? Why? His reply came in a few days. Mr. Jonathan Gillette, I guess probably. Again, who knows how to pronounce things. Yes, it's true. I know your real name. I asked a few of my experts to trace back the email you sent me, and it lined up with the coordinates of one Pirate O's General Store in Draper, Utah. It seems you composed this email while you were plugged into their connection, enjoying a sangria señorial, it seems. A quick call to store owner Chase McGueen sorted all this out. Now, please tell me the point of this ridiculous anonymity exercise, As it turns out, oddly enough, it seems that your real self is just an unknown programmer from Utah. That myth is easily dispelled. Why not make something of your real self? Of course, I know why, and I can tell you, because your fear of the world has clouded your ability to do things to improve your situation. You're stuck there in Draper, Utah, until you can cut through the paranoia. Please, Mr. Gillette, come on in. The water's fine. Best, Emery Pestis. And then Y talks about searching to see what it is, and like the place is not actually there. And then he says, Dearest Doctor, thank you for the letter. Sorry to bother you again, but can you tell me anything else with this place Pirate O's? Just an address is fine. Why? And then the email bounced. So I was trying to explain this to someone one time, and I said, about this talk, we were like talking about it, and I was like, okay, so you have the real but trying to be anonymous person talking to the fake person with a fake sounding name who is theoretically real. Then the real fake person asks the fake real but actually fake person what he thinks about his anonymity, and he totally he says that that's stupid, but then also gives Y the answer to his question about his own self-doubt about his identity. And then Y just totally ignores it. And then the fake, real, fake person disappears because he's not real. And they were like, it's pretty obvious you did almost get that English degree, I think. But the other funny thing about this is like Pirate O's in Draper, Utah is a real place. And a Google search will trivially show you that the thing is real. So like even then, the real person is saying that a real place is not real. So Closures consists of a ton of these kinds of stories that are wrapped up like this that explain these things. But I think it's pretty obvious you can see here that like Y is saying to us, right? Like, I am super paralyzed by not knowing what's going on. Then there's this section about Kafka. If you see me tweeting about reading Kafka all this month, that's because Y told us not to do it, so I'm doing it. So Kafka is an interesting character in relation to all this because basically Kafka told his best friend, Max Brod, to burn all of his writings before he died. And Max Brod, I was reading my copy of the trial and or America, and in the preface it says like, yeah, it shows the letter where he's like, please burn all my stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm holding it now. Good job, Max. But so it's the same thing, right? Like Y deleted all his stuff, but it came back. So in a section about like talking about Kafka stuff, there's this sort of self-reference in there, which is really great. And one other part is, this is one of my favorite quotes of the entire thing, is down here at the bottom. Reality's kind of a medium, maybe greater than paper. And so this is like also part of the reason why there's this struggle with identity, right? Is like once you start pretending to be someone else who's not real, and you do it all the time to everyone, at what point do you disappear into this fake person? And at what point does the persona you take on become your like reality? And it's also sort of like an artwork in and of itself, right? Like every time you are acting as this person, you are doing some of this artwork. So there's that whole chunk of section too that's really super good. Okay. So this relates to impermanence, right? So Kafka burning all his papers, why disappearing? This is sort of this quote that he tweeted right before he disappeared, and now it makes sense after reading this thing. What if America was only written for the 32-bit PowerPC, which is a Kafka novel? And so we'll talk about what that means in a second. So page 23, I'm not going to read nearly as much of this, but basically he finished reading his books for the month, like reading all the Kafka, and said, I finished early, I was done, I was decimated. To program anymore was pointless. My programs would never live as long as the trial. A computer will never live as long as the trial. Hadn't he told Max Brod to destroy all those books? He said, burn them, my friend, burn these books. But look, here was America, thoroughly reconstructed. So one of the big deals that Y has this struggle with is the fact that in our like march for progress means that we also lose all sense of history, which makes it really hard to have those meta-narratives about where we're going and what we're doing, because like we don't have any sort of institutional memory, and we're really bad at transferring the lessons we've learned to the next generation of programmers. So his point about if America had been written for the PowerPC is that like if America was a computer program instead of a book, and it was written for an architecture that is outdated, you wouldn't need someone to burn the book. You would just let it atrophy and bit rot, and it goes away on its own. I don't have the first couple programs I wrote as a child. I have a printout of some of the things that I, did, which is also kind of funny too, because Y's whole blogging printer thing, right? It's like, I was like, man, I'm so lucky I even have a printer still. But like, you needed one to fully experience this going out, because like, we've moved on. We don't need printers anymore for the most part, right? So even like the medium in which this is happening is this like, impermanence. And so I've discovered this about myself, about Go. I'm a super Go hater. And like I realized that it's actually more about me than it is about Go, because if you just came to programming through Ruby or JavaScript and you used Go for the first time, you would be like, this is amazing. It's just when I'm like, OCaml said structural subtyping for 20 years. Why is that cool in Go? Remember when you all said that Java was really boring and that's why it was terrible, and now you're saying, but Go is really boring and that's why it's good? I don't understand. This is fine, but like I've come to realize that I'm an old man and I've like seen all this history go by, and we haven't like, every time I have a problem, I do some research on the literature, and someone wrote a paper in the 60s like saying how it works, right? Like there's so much of computer science that was solved in that like late 50s to early 70s era that we just totally like ignore completely. So impermanence and the way that our industry is like that. Flute Island is a super ridiculous last part here, page 71 and 92. So the last whole chunk of this, the last like 20 pages or 30 pages, is actually this really ridiculous allegory about a cult that looks like Steve Jobs, and they wear turtlenecks and and jeans, and they speak this like French that's not actually French, it's like half French, and it's really trippy, and like it's good, but it's a just giant metaphor. So he first talks about Bill Gates versus Steve Jobs and how there's like this titans of industry that go back and forth, these weren't but two sides of the same coin. The rich computer guys of late 20th century commemorative coin. They represented all those rags to riches ideals that's so intoxicating our society. And so this like comparison goes back and forth, and then he skips to this job stuff. And so what's funny about the job stuff, 92 is the other page here. None of them speak anything except this broken French. And this guy shows up, and this is where Y gets like really sarcastic about the state of our industry as well. So if it's impermanent and always changing and never staying the same, the other thing too is this. I'm Paul Allen, he said, of Microsoft. Hello, I said feebly. I'm a wealthy, powerful man in this region and also in the world, beloved by some, hated by others. He adjusted his glasses and took out his wallet. I'm eccentric, he said, and gave me two $100 bills. And I spend my money freely and unpredictably, but often on things that improve life for everyone in ways that are not immediately obvious, but will ultimately benefit us. Why did you give this to me, I said, holding out the bill. 2 bills, the bill? I just need a ride. I'm usually 10 to 20 years ahead of the curve, he said. Most people say about 13, and I won't lie, that does ring true to me. He'd been motioning with his wallet, but he put it away. You're a man who's learned English despite the pressures of the crowd. Consider this me investing in you. Elsewhere, he says this thing where he's like, other people struggle with large questions about their lives, but what I struggle with is my hatred of entrepreneurs. And so there's this whole thing too about like that our industry is super obsessed with this like investment, startups, making money, shenanigans, and like we've lost all of the parts about craft. So that's also a big part of it too, with why and his disappearance. And if you notice, like for those of you who've been around in a while, we don't get blog posts and conference talks that are like, look at this cool, weird, wacky thing I did with Ruby anymore, right? And part of this is because we've explored the problem space, and like, you know, way back when Ruby was new, that was like new and exciting and interesting, but now we're just busy making money with our agile, social, mobile, Rails applications, right? And so we sort of lost a lot of that like spark and interestingness and like weirdness that we used to have. And so that's also one of the reasons why it was time for Y to go. So what happened and where is Y? The biggest thing is this disclaimer on page 13, which pretty much straight up exactly says what happened. The first thing is that he says, please forgive any distortion in the text. It's quite perilous to communicate this way. And so like this to me speaks of like this dangerousness of taking on that persona briefly, right? Like if this is causing him all this stress and trouble, like readopting the persona is dangerous. And that's why he also did it via this text medium instead of coming out and like giving a talk or posting some audio or video, like communicating this way. Anyway, here's the paragraph. This is the most important, and this was so good for me personally as well. But now I want to make it perfectly clear that in these papers and all my other works in life belong to the general public. In fact, I would also like to turn myself over to all of you as well. This was actually done several years ago, but in an embarrassingly disorganized manner. I like what you've done with the character, but I want to step into his tattered suit for the next 100 pages, and after that, I'm yours again. Do what you must. I always enjoy seeing what becomes of me. So first of all, this is like super big, right? Because I talked about my own crisis about what I should do with Y's stuff and if it's okay or not. And so to hear Y say that it is okay and in fact maybe good was like super good for me. But beyond that, this also speaks to the fact that like Y is more of a mindset or a persona than he is the person. And so we should all, as he says, he wants to give himself back to us. Like we should be taking on the persona of Y every so often because it is good and useful and interesting. And so in a certain sense, Y is not dead. Y is just different. And Y is like everyone, not just one person, right? We had one guy who was really good at performing Y, but like he doesn't want to do it anymore. So if we want Y to stick around, we need to keep performing Y and not burden one person with so much being Y, right? If Jonathan came back to Ruby today, do you think that we would allow him to be Jonathan? Like if you saw a commit from him in some logs, and you're like, where's the wacky joke? Why aren't you being silly? Why? Like, come on, what's going on? Like he couldn't actually be himself because he was already someone else instead around all of us. And this happens too with anyone who has a public persona when they don't want to be that persona anymore. And then fighting null, I won't cite this for you because I'm running a little long, which is good because I wanted to make sure to fill it all up. But one of the big things that Y talked about being really terrible was this fighting null over and over and over again. So he's like, null was the biggest problem I had as a programmer, right? Because you like get this error and it's never where the error actually happens. It's always somewhere else. And like, to me, this also speaks about the permanence thing, right? Because again, to bring up Go briefly, like I'm like, why would you make a language with null pointers today, right? The guy who invented the concept of null calls it my billion-dollar mistake. He like thinks that it's tragic and terrible and it causes so many problems. But because of our impermanence and because of our lack of like passing on the torch, we still build new programming languages with null. But he talked about this being super ridiculously frustrating, and it's very humanizing, especially if you hold like people in great regard like we do with Y. To see him struggle with something is really interesting and useful. One of the reasons why I enjoy teaching beginners, I just got done teaching high school kids for 6 weeks, is that like you don't know how much you know and remember. And working with someone who does not understand what a variable is really makes you appreciate the days whenever you're feeling really terrible about nil and struggling with some gem that I probably wrote that has bad docs. Anyway, so moving on, where do we go from here? I sort of touched this really briefly, but like we need to take the persona on now. It's done. Like Jonathan is done with it and is like given it to us as a present, and so we need to make sure to keep its spirit alive amongst everyone. And so that's really important. I've been doing this talk recently about irresponsible Ruby. I think this is like part of it. But also it's just like allowing ourselves the freedom to be silly and innovate and mess with things and be weird and like be ourselves and not just like money-making machines, which we all are as well. I didn't manage to super spoil it, but I'm going to now. So at the end, the very end, This is, I cried, softly, trembling, unable to take the pencil from him, but unable to let go. I cried all the tears that I had, and I resolved to say it with conviction. This is time well spent, I said, and biting my lip, tasting my own salt. At that point, I must have died. And then there's this last page, which has some writing that you can't really make out that's about the fact that he did not actually die, but you can't quite tell because there's this hand covering the way. So anyway, I think this is true, and that it definitely was time well spent. So thanks.